Hi. Before we dive into the episode, I have something so exciting to share. My debut Christian romance novel, Finding Forevermore, is live on Kickstarter. Kickstarter is a special crowdfunding platform where I can offer exclusive content and rewards you won't find anywhere else. If you love a swoony friends to lovers romance with themes of brokenness and second chances, I'd be so grateful if you'd check it out. Thank you so much for being part of this journey. Now let's get on to the episode. Welcome to the Christian Romance Podcast, where we go behind the books with inspiring Christian romance authors, exploring faith, love, and the journey that brings the story to life. I'm your host, Kelly Jo Wilson, and today we're chatting with Jill Williamson. Jill is a multi-passionate creative who loves the arts. She's written over 30 books for readers of all ages and is best known for her Blood of Kings fantasy series, 2 of which won Christie Awards and made Voya magazine's best science fiction, fantasy, and horror list. She produces films with her husband and teaches about writing at conferences. Make sure to stay tuned to the end of the episode so you can hear about our newest book giveaway. Now, here's my conversation with Jill. Hi, Jill. I am so happy to have you on the Christian Romance Podcast today. I cannot wait to talk about your book and everything you're doing. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, I am like so excited to jump into this story, but I want you to just let our listeners know a little bit about you, how you got started on your author journey, a little bit about your background, and just kind of what your faith journey looked like in that.
Oh, golly. Okay. Yes. I could talk for hours. Well, I grew up in Alaska, and without electricity or running water. My dream was to be a fashion designer. And that was partly because I ended up making or altering a lot of my clothes. My mom bought everything at the thrift store and it was not cool. And I wanted it to look cool. So I was always sewing things. And I was going to go to New York and go to the city where there's tall buildings and electricity. And I did. I managed to get there eventually, but I did 2 years of college in Fairbanks, Alaska. Then I transferred to this school called Northwest Nazarene College in Idaho, which was a Christian school. I went there because a friend in Fairbanks went there and talked me into it. And I really I was not raised a Christian, so I had no self-esteem and no plan except that I wanted to get to FIT, the Fashion Institute of Technology in Manhattan. And then at the time it was college, had a visiting student program in their home ec department. So I transferred there as a non-Christian and roommated with my friend. And then she got married and ditched me and moved to married housing. And I was by myself. And so it was actually come the fall. So I was a junior, and come the following spring break, they closed down the university and kick everybody out. You're supposed to go to your family or something, but I didn't have any money and I didn't make any friends because I was hiding in my room. And during chapel, they announced they were going to have a mission trip to go to northern Idaho to clean up a flood, and they would feed you if you wanted to come. Sign up, and I was like the first person to sign up because I really thought I didn't know where I was gonna be homeless. And so then I found myself as a non-Christian on a mission trip to clean up a flood, and I was completely out of my element. But there was this funny guy, and I kept sitting by him because he was the only one that wasn't kind of scaring me. Everybody was praying a lot and making me nervous, which was fine. But at the time, I thought that was weird. And so I hung out with Brad, who eventually became my husband.
Aw.
And so I met him on that trip. But it was about a month or so later that because I started talking to one of the other girls who was in the degree program as me. We would be upstairs sewing on Saturdays, working on our outfits because we both wanted to be in fashion. And I confessed to her my deep secret of not being a Christian at this place, and she laughed at me, not unkindly, but she was like, "Jill, half the basketball teams here on scholarship. They have parties and this is that you're not alone." And I was like, "Really?" And so
Aw.
that confession started a long conversation with that dear friend who basically eventually I asked Jesus into my heart and I became a Christian.
Aw.
Um So yeah, I still wonder what I wrote on the application to the school because I know there was a section about how you got saved. I would love to see it and know what I wrote because I was telling stories
You
even
told a
then.
story. I was just thinking that. You told a story even then.
I don't know what story it was, but I got me into the school. So, but anyway, so that's how I became a believer. And I met my husband. We made a deal. He wanted to make movies, and I wanted to be a fashion designer. So the deal was he would come with me for 1 year to Manhattan so I could finish my degree, and then we'd move to LA, and that's what we did. And we both got into our industries. He worked as a tour guide at Paramount Studios, and eventually got hired as a PA on a TV show for the writers' room, which is kind of
Oh,
funny
that's cool.
looking back. All he really did was buy them snacks, and they ate like their snacks list was ridiculous. He would drive all over LA looking for like this one kind of special nuts from like Brazil, or it was weird. Like this is why
Ah.
movies cost so much, apparently, because people get to eat whatever they want. I don't know, but
Oh my
and I
gosh. Give
worked.
me some beef jerky. I'm good.
It was crazy. And then I worked at two different places. The first place made little girls' clothes for like Kmart and Walmart, and the second place made evening gowns that sold to like Neiman Marcus and Nordstrom. And I worked there about 5 years, and it was like the Devil Wears Prada. If you
I
ever,
was gonna ask you. Oh my gosh, girl, you're in my head. I was gonna ask you if it was
yeah,
really like that. Is it really like that? It's like
it was for
cutthroat
me.
kinda.
I'm sure there are lovely companies where the fashion designers are not quite so paranoid,
Mhm.
but they're all paranoid. You're going to steal their job, and they're very controlling, and they won't let you do anything creative. I cut swatches forever, it felt like. So I wanted out. When I got pregnant with our first child, I was like, I'm gonna get out, and I did. And my husband wanted out too, so he ended up going and becoming an ordained minister, and we were youth pastors for 16 years. So
Aw.
we completely shifted, which is so funny because now we're coming back full circle into some of these dreams we once chased. But so that's how so when I was home with my son, I don't do I'm a doer. So I don't do nothing very well. So I had to have projects. What am I doing? What am I doing? Um, and I was trying to figure out Lord, what do you want me to be when I grow up? Because I already had one career. And I thought that I needed to tell my story of growing up in Alaska and my faith story. And I was looking for how you can get invited to be a speaker, and somewhere online I stumbled on to write articles for magazines, and I was like, "Oh, I
Yeah.
could do that. How hard could that be?" So I start trying to get published in like these magazines like Today's Christian Women and all these magazines, Mops, Mothers of Preschoolers. And it was not easy to get published in those magazines. Um, but so while I'm doing that, my teens and my youth group are reading. They were obsessed with Twilight at the time,
Mm.
and Percy Jackson and Harry Potter. Those were the really popular things. And so I was reading alongside. I'm like, what are you guys reading? And then I was like, I'm gonna write you guys a story. And I started writing a story for them about this spy kid slash missionary kid. I just thought this was great. Missionaries are gonna be heroes in my book. It's gonna be amazing. And I had so much fun. Like writing fiction was like bing. Like I was sucked in instantly, and I was having a blast. And I completely forgot my noble calling of being a speaker, and I started to feel really guilty about it.
Mm.
And I confessed it to my pastor one day, which is kind of funny because he was a writer too. And he said, Jill, that's crazy. You know, Jesus told stories.
Yes.
And what about Nathan? You know, he convicted King David of his sin using a story. And I was like, you're right. So I kind of felt like he was telling me there's nothing, if God's calling you to write stories, then write stories. And so I did. I saw that. I was like, whoo, full speed ahead. It still took me 5 years to get one that was publishable to sell my first one. It was like I put myself through college again by going to writers' conferences and all that kind of thing. But that's how where I started and how I got there. And my first one that got published was By Darkness Hid, which now Enclave owns, and that is the first in the Blooded Kings trilogy, which is what Sunrise is using as their world. So it's funny. I'm back kind of where I started.
I love it. I love it. And I love so much that you guys like I love that you say you're a doer too, but I love that you and Brad just supported each other so much. Like you're like, we'll do 1 year here. Because a year's a good amount of time. I feel like a year gives you a good reflection. It lets you get your feet wet because, a couple months you're not even in the think of it yet. You just don't know. Like a year is a good time to see like, okay, this is kind of working out, or I'm getting my feel, or I'm not getting my feel kind of thing. So I love that you guys supported each other and you really are both kind of did your thing and you supported your creative endeavors together. I think that that's such a wonderful blessing. Not everybody has that, sometimes, especially when it comes to creative things. I feel like there's always this kind of stigma where it's like, no, you're going to be starving and you're not gonna make it. Like it's like this fear. Even in the creator, like we think
yeah.
that too. Like, oh my gosh. But I feel like,
And that does happen.
it does
There has
happen.
been times
Yeah.
where, we chose this path. And so,
Right.
that's part of it.
Absolutely. But, God put that desire in your heart for a reason. And I love that you're like feeling this conviction and like, I feel bad, I'm not telling my story and things like that, which I think will come just even from chatting with you earlier, it will certainly come. But yeah, you fall in love with fiction and interweaving these like hope into these stories because it's great and it's fun and it brings people to know Jesus and to look at like a Christian worldview in a different way, which I think is so wonderful. And he totally puts that in your heart and your husband's too, to make films and things like that. It's just so exciting. I love that you're like on a mission trip. Just you saying I'm a doer, that just proves it. Like you're just like, I got to go do something. I got to eat. I'm going on a mission trip just to do it. And you're helping with a flood which God bless you. I mean, my goodness, that is so
the worst
great.
was the worst part was when we were at lunch and they all did this. They put their thumbs up and then they're all looking at me and they go, you have to pray. And I was like, what? I didn't know how these things worked. And then I had to pray and I did pray, but I said something like, thank you, Jesus, for this food. Thank you for this food, Jesus. Thank you very much, Jesus, for this food. Thank you very much. Amen. And then there was all this snickering. And I was like, they don't know that was like the first time I ever prayed.
I love how God was like dragging you towards him. He wasn't knocking on your door. He was shoving you out the door so that you can come to him. And then meeting Brad. So was Brad on the mission trip? Now, was he a Christian whenever you met him, or did you guys kind of come to that?
Brad was a Christian,
okay.
and I was just friends with him. I didn't like. He was the only one not scaring me, and he was funny, and so I'd hang out with him. And then later in the cafeteria, he came and hung out with me at a table one day at lunch, and was like, "Hey," and we got to know each other. We both like movies a lot, and yeah, he's funny. He's a funny guy. He's the youngest. I'm an oldest. We kind of had that we kind of fell in line.
Yes, absolutely.
That worked out. So yeah, no, it was good. God's been working on us from the start. But his mom was a little concerned. I got baptized at college. That I want to say, I don't know when it was. Maybe it must have been that spring before the end of the year, but his mother sent me a card like, congratulations on your baptism. And I remember thinking she was probably really worried. My son is dating this person who just became a Christian like last week. I don't know about this.
Yes.
But it worked out okay.
Why is his family, they've always been Christian. They've like, he grew up in the church, right? Yeah. Well,
he grew up in the church.
You never know. I mean, especially if his call was to be a minister and he's like this ordained minister, he knows that's the story. I mean, people come to know Jesus in all kind of different ways and at all kind of different times. And that's what's so wonderful is that it's never too late. It's just never too late. And I think that, it's just beautiful. I love it. Wonderful. So you grew up in Alaska. I don't want to gloss over that because you were so funny. Like, I want to go to New York. So New York, from where you grew up, could not be more of a contrast.
I mean, literally no electricity. I when we first moved there, I was the oldest of 5. And so I had to haul, actually there was only 4 of us when we first moved there. My sister came along later, but we had to go to the river and haul water in a 5-gallon bucket and bring it back. And like that, there's that. And then there's like riding the subways in Manhattan. It's just so different. But, I think part of it, some people say, oh, you can't do that. We live here. And oh, yeah, I'll show them. Which is funny because when I look back, I think I never would have been a good fashion designer. That was not my skill. What I was good at was pattern making. My dad's a construction. He builds things and I build things. And now I build worlds, right? So I've always been a builder. But nobody really saw that. I knew I was really good at pattern making. That I was those were my best classes, but I didn't really understand. In my head, fashion designer was the title I needed. And it wasn't until later I was like, oh, fashion designers, or excuse me, pattern makers make quite a bit. They make a good living, and it's not nearly as stressful out in that other room
Oh.
than working with a designer. But I was already at the end of that journey, and I'm glad that I did it, because I think it's one of those things that I'd always wondered, you know. And so that's kind of how I've always lived my life. Like, I'm going to do it, because otherwise I might regret that I didn't try.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, life is too
So
short. I
yeah.
mean, we don't, we get real comfortable in our comfort zones, right? We get very comfortable just kind of easing through things sometimes because we don't want chaos. I feel like all of us, like just as human beings, just don't want the chaos. We don't want things to go wrong. We don't want failure. We don't want any of that. So we get real comfy. But really, in reality, nobody has any idea what's going to happen. You have no idea what's going to happen tomorrow. And if you really think about it, like it's funny because especially branching out to do something like fashion design, making movies, making books, doing these more creative things that I feel like a lot of times you do have this like sense of like call to, it's like you might as well just do it, because if not, what are you going to do? It's actually less secure to be in like one position at a company that you don't own, that you can't make the decisions, that they can just let you go one day and that's it. It's less secure to do that, even though it seems like it's amazing, which don't get me wrong. I mean, I've worked in companies. I actually started out, I'm a nurse. A nurse turned medical writer now, so I can work from home and be with my boys, but it's better to have more of a branching out, like different streams of income and things like that, to be more secure at least. But even in that, you got to trust the big guy, because you don't know what's going to happen. I mean, he's going to put you in places where you need to be, or maybe where your family may be blessed, or maybe take you through a trial that you need to refine something in your life. And yeah, you just never know. So you might as well just do the thing that you love. You might as well at least try, like you
Yep.
said, at least do it and see, I love that you tried it and you were like, nope. I can't believe that. It's funny because I was wondering if the Devil Wears Prada kind of thing, if that was like real, because if you think about it, I mean, the models and things like that, they have to look a certain way. They have to be very, it's a very much like self-image kind of thing, body has to be a certain way. So I would imagine it would be very tough, just a tough industry, you know?
It is. It is tough. It was weird, but I'm glad I did it.
I love that you say it's weird, because I picture you being there like old, not to mention you're the oldest. So you have a whole other sense of responsibility, like within you, just ingrained in you, and like a whole other sense of like, you guys are freaking out and this is like not even a big deal. Like, what's going
I
on?
yeah, I couldn't do I and she could the second fashion designer in particular could like I could tell she didn't like how I dressed. She
Mm,
would sometimes look me up and down, and it's funny that I really thought I was going to make it in this world, because I grew up in Alaska. I mean, I sewed my own stuff, and I'm more of a, I'm just too practical to be freaking out about
yeah.
whether it's, that bead or that bead. Like, it's a bead, you know? So it's funny and I get it. Like, if I was the designer, I know what I want. But you don't have to like destroy people because they picked the wrong bead, And so it's just like intense, like so stressful, and everybody's freaking out all the time. It was crazy.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I can totally see that. But I love that you made your own clothes too. Was that really difficult to do? Was that hard? Like, did you?
Um, I didn't think so, but man, I did not do make them well. Let me just put it that way, because we didn't have electricity. So at night, we would run the generator, and I would sew sitting on my floor with like my cross-legged with my knee on the pedal, like, and I'd be like doing this craziness. Um, but when the generator went off and I still wanted to work, I would just crank the side of the sewing machine to,
Would you?
and if I got too impatient, I would sew it by hand. And that was when it was trouble, because I was too impatient. I would take these huge stitches. And I remember trying to take this, this pair of pants and make it into a skirt, which, if you've ever seen that, where you take the legs apart and then you kind of sew the little crotch line and flat and everything to make it kind of look like jeans were turned into a skirt, right? Then you wear them to high school, and with those big like half-inch stitches, and then you feel a little like,
Oh,
I don't know how many times something I wore, like I like something started to rip out while I was at school, like, oh, Whoopsie. People were like, it's just Jill.
It's just Jill. She will make
she's
something.
wearing something weird today. I don't know what she's doing.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, Jill, you are just so fun. I think that I love that. I just love that about you. I think it's such a wonderful trait to have. It's like, I'll just make it. I'm just going to do it. And then I'll just deal with this stitch coming out and, my underwear showing. And
It's weird because you'd think I'd have no shame, but I have a lot of like false shame or whatever you call it. So it's funny. Like I make myself do things that would because I'm really actually quite introverted. So it's weird. Like these pieces that, like, if I think of myself as a character, I've got these warring, competing values. Apparently, like I really want to just make stuff and create and like have people go, "Whoa, that's amazing, Jill!" But then it's like I don't want that kind of attention. Like my skirt ripped out. So it's funny. Like I must want that more. I don't know. I like to psychoanalyze myself. So think about it too much.
Well, I can totally understand that though. You want to create, you want to put your stuff out there, but you don't need the whole like rigmarole around it, right? Like you don't need this whole like show. You just want it to be amazing for someone else. You want it to be, yeah, totally. Talking about creating worlds, tell us about, so you just released your book, Squire of Truth. Tell us a little bit about that and just kind of like the origin of that, like how we were talking about a little bit before we started recording.
Yeah. So, okay. So Squire of Truth takes place in my Blood of Kings story world. The Blood of Kings world is called Eretz, ER''RETS, which is Hebrew for, in Genesis, it says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And the word for earth is Eretz. When I started writing, this was my first fantasy novel, by not Squire of Truth, but By Darkness Hid was my very first book that got published in 2009. And when I wrote that book, I had not yet written a fantasy novel. And so I was like, well, it has to have a map. And I had all these ideas of what it had to have. But I also didn't know how to make cool fantasy sounding languages. And I thought, I had heard that J.K. Rowling used Greek for her magic spells in the Harry Potter books. And I thought, well, that was clever. What do I have? And I looked on the shelf and I had a French English dictionary and a Hebrew Greek concordance. And I thought, well, Hebrew sounds like fantasy. It sounds kind of like Klingon a little bit, right? That's what I said, which maybe wasn't very funny, but so that's what I started to do. I was like, I'm just going to use Hebrew. And so I started picking things and creating this world. And that was the book that I ended up getting published first. It was the 6th book I wrote, not the first one. It took me 6 books to get one that was ready to be published. And I sold that one to the house that eventually became Enclave. It was originally Marcher Lord Press. It became Enclave, and it's still Enclave today. And they still published that original trilogy.
Awesome.
So that world, Susan May Warren, is a well-known romance novelist, and I used to hang out with her at writers' conferences. Oftentimes, we'd both be on staff, and this one particular Oregon Christian writers would have the staff line up along the wall, and they'd introduce everybody at lunch. And Warren and Williamson, we'd always be standing in line next to each other, and so we'd chat. And we saw each other at a lot of conferences like that. But she told me recently that she had read those books and got them for her kids at the time, who were, I don't know if they were teenagers or what they were at the time, but I didn't know this. She didn't tell me or anything. It wasn't until she called me. When was that? I want to say it must have been 2021, maybe, where she told me about Sunrise, this publishing house that she had started with her friend, Lindsay Harrell, and the way the Sunrise publishing model works, which is kind of like a little bit like mentorship / missionary publishing, where you people apply to write in your world. And she told me about it and said that she really wanted to do a fantasy line. And she was like, who can I get? It's got to be Jill. And she told me then that her kids had read the books and she loved the world, but I could do any world I wanted. But she kept talking about the Blood of Kings world. And so I got the hint. No, I'm just kidding.
You're like, but no, she's right. That you're throwing dances.
that was the right world. So she said that she thought, let me think about it or whatever. And I was like, okay, I will. But there really wasn't too much thinking. I was like, Susan May Warren wants to write, me to write something for her publishing house. That was amazing. Like, of course I will. And she also said that one of the things, she looked for in mentor authors was, to have a big world that had a lot of possibility for spin-off stories, but also to have a heart of a mentor. And I had been working with my friend Stephanie Morrill on the Go Teen Writers website for like 12 years. And so she remembered that about us. We put out some books for teen writers, same information as adult writers because they're competing for the same
Yeah.
jobs, but we kind of just geared our blog to them. And so she knew that I had the heart of a teacher, and that's important for the mentors at the Sunrise Publishing House, because what we did do is kind of hold blind auditions, let people apply to write in our world, and then we narrowed it down to 3. Some lines have 4 or 5, but I chose 3 authors, and then I mentor them as they write their first book that's going to be published. And so that's what happened. These authors put forth story ideas from my original story, and that's what came out. And then Susie wanted me to write a novella to kick it off. So that's what Squire of Truth is. It is my supposed novella, but it got longer because I'm me. I do have I don't know if you call it award. I wear it as an award. Bethany House, the longest novel Bethany House publishers ever published, was one of my, I wrote a prequel trilogy for the Blood of Kings world, and Bethany House published those books, and they're like really long. I was trying to do like Christian Game of Thrones was my plan. Anyway, so yeah, I published.
That's wonderful though. It's so funny. We just went into Barnes and Noble the other day. I just took my 11-year-old son, and we picked up a fantasy book too. And I said, buddy, this book, because he gets credit for so many pages that he reads, like for school. I'm like, you would get like 5 books out of this, but but that's just the genre. I mean, it is. You're building this massive world usually, and it's so intriguing, and you have all these neat details and magic and different things like that. It's so fun.
Well, so anyway, so yes, so that's where Squire of Truth came from. I needed to write a story that could be used to kind of launch the Blood of Kings Legends. So we added legends to the world. So the spin-off series is Blood of Kings Legends, and these are a little different. My original trilogy, I still argue to this day with the publisher, but I wrote it for teens because, like I said before, I was youth pastor's wife, and that's what I saw, right? I was writing it for that audience, but my characters were 16 and 17-year-olds in a medieval world, which is adults. You're a grown up at that point. You're coming of age. And so it really straddled that line. So the publishing house actually published it for adults, even though I still called it YA. And
I was going to say, is it still young adult maybe, or did they consider it adult?
It's still considered adult. It won a Christie Award in the regular fantasy category. The first 2 did. The book 1 and book 2 won Christie Awards in that. Amazing. In the grown up, not in the young adult category. So I have to, I guess, concede that it was for grown ups. But anyway, so I totally got lost on what I was talking about.
So the Legend series. So you
Legends. Oh, so the original series is a trilogy. It's very much one book takes after the other, and it's one big story in 3 books. But the Legends books, with the exception of mine, which is this kind of anomaly because they each stand alone. They have their own stories, their own romance thread, and they're romances. They're standalone fantasy adventure romance stories. Whereas my original trilogy had one big romantic thread in it, but each book was very much went to the next. So my story, my understanding was I was supposed to write a story that would kind of kick off the world. And Susie said it would be really cool if your characters can kind of like make cameos in other people's, in my authors' books, right? So I was like, cameos, what would they be doing in these different places, right? I'm thinking, because I mean, my authors are all over the map for where they wanted their stories to be, because I literally have a map that I drew of the world, and I'm like,
you have to though, right?
What would make them travel?
It helps.
Oh yeah, I love maps.
Yeah,
fantasy maps are my favorite. So I came up with the idea that they might be like traveling minstrels or something, and they'd go around, and so that would make sense. Like I could put minstrels into the background of all these stories that they're writing, right? So I had this idea, and then when we were at our brainstorming event, we had one where we all got to get together with Susie and brainstorm all 4 of these stories. Well, not mine, my 3 author stories. Susie said, I said, this is my idea. And she goes, well, you have to use someone from your book though. Because so I was making up new characters. But Susie had, the authors were supposed to write about fan characters that my readers from the original trilogy would be like, oh yeah, what happened to those guys? So I had made a list. So Susie had the list, and she's like, well, what about this guy? And she says, what about Cole? And I was like, oh, Oh, well, now I pictured Cole as like a 14-year-old kid. And so I said, well, I think he might be kind of young. She's like, no, I think he'll be good. And she just said something and she's like, think about it. And I'm like, oh, okay. And so I started thinking about it. And I'm like, Cole? Well, I went back and I looked and I never say how old Cole is.
Oh,
The
okay.
prince, the boy, my main character boy in the Bloody Kings, who's 16, right? But he's really tall. He's like 6'2", he's a big kid. He sees Cole, who's this scrawny person, and wants to take him under his wing. And so I thought it would be really funny if we come to find out that Cole's actually older than my main character who becomes the prince, right? And all this time he's been giving him
Oh.
advice, and Cole's just too nice to say, dude, I'm older than you. So I got this idea and I thought it was really kind of fun. And so I started playing with it. And then I decided, okay, so I will use Cole, but he's 19 years old and he's older than our prince. And it'll be funny when our prince finds out. Nobody tells me anything, he says. I didn't know you were older than me. I'm so embarrassed. I've been trying to mentor you all this time. And I thought that was funny. So that's how Cole became my main character. It was mostly Susie's idea, and then I played with it until I made it work. And then I decided to find a way that he could be a traveling musician. And so my story sets up these stories, and it also sets up another series I'm going to write for Sunrise. So it's setting up 2 series that are taking place in my world. There's going to be all kinds of fantasy novels from Sunrise. We're having a lot of
wonderful.
fun. And I hope readers like them because we're having a good time.
Absolutely. It sounds wonderful. So who is Cole's love interest in this story?
So Cole's,
Or, well, is it in your story? So you say you're setting up the prequel, so that's with Cole's story and then the heroine, and then you have the other trilogy after that. So who's his love interest?
So his love interest is a character named Miss Stel, and she is a very confident and outgoing person, and he is very introverted. So a little bit of opposites attract there. But I had fun. I had fun with her. She was a little difficult for me. Both of them were at first until I realized that I was Cole. And I was like, oh, I can write that. But Miss Stel was really hard because she's very extroverted, vivacious, confident, very flirty. And so actually, I got inspired by my friend who's really into the Enneagram personality types. I don't know if you know what those are.
Oh yeah.
So she knows all about them, and so Miss Stel's personality type and my best friend from high school are like the same. So I kept having her help me. I'm like, okay, what would you do? And she'd tell me, and I'd be like, really?
I know, like what?
I would never do that. Oh my goodness. But it was so helpful because I was able to write this character who was so not like me because my friend helped me. And it was so great about that. God is so good. All these years later, 30 years from high school, I'm learning about this particular personality type, and I'm like, oh, that makes so much sense because like in high school, I'd be going on about something deep and important that was really, I'm all in this zone of moodiness or whatever, which is very much my personality type and Cole's. and
Cole.
And my friend Kim she'd be like, okay, well, let's do something else. And she would change the subject on me, and I'd be like, oh, I guess I was boring
You're
her.
like, this is existential stuff we're talking about here, and you want to go to the mall. What are you saying?
Right? And I used to get my feelings hurt all the time in high school, but when she's helping me with this character, it just hit me like God showed me, Jill, this was never personal. But that particular personality type, they don't like to sit in negative things. It's very uncomfortable for them. And so she did not want to sit there with you and to hear all of your woes about life and your deep concerns. And she did. She sat with you for a while, but we got to move on. And so it's so funny because that is who it's like. My story is strangely my best friend and I in this book. No, that's weird, but
I love it.
There's parts of us in
so
there.
Fun. Yeah, that's what's so fun about it. But that's what makes it so authentic because you really have these like real experiences you can draw from,
absolutely.
and these like real people. I mean, yourself and then your friend, which I love. And I think that it's so great. I love the opposites attract because it's so real. It really is. And I mean, me and my husband couldn't be more opposite with some things, it just is so very much kind of like you and your friend. Like I'm the more extroverted one. Although I will say I do like to regroup alone. alone. I do kind of like to retreat a little bit, and just kind of rejuvenate. But yeah, very much extroverted, always talking to people. He's like on the wall waiting. He has like a total like face that is not going to be approached. Like he's not going to be approached, like meanwhile, he's like one of the sweetest people I've ever met in my life. So it's just funny how it's so, it's just kind of how personalities are. But
That is funny.
so how do they, so no spoilers. So how do they cross paths? Like what is their kind of, what forces them together essentially to
Okay,
get to know each
so
other?
this was another different thing for me. So it is a murder mystery. So this is a
Oh,
fantasy murder mystery, which I had never written before, but I felt like I needed, um, there will be spoilers if I explain my whole logic here, but basically,
yes. No, no
um,
spoilers,
this
just highlights.
this poor girl, Miss Stel, her roommate is murdered. And so she had just met Cole in the marketplace and tried to flirt with him because she was she was trying to get someone to buy her dinner because her roommate has been sick. And she is a singer, and like the people were not very generous that day and threw her like 3 coins, and then she got robbed. And so she's she's like, oh, maybe this boy will buy me some dinner. So she's working really hard to try to like, hey, come hang out with me, let's and then it doesn't work out for her, and she has to go home, or she has to go do dishes at this place where she absolutely has no other hope. She has to go do dishes, which she hates to have to do manual labor. Ugh, she's a singer, an artist, gosh. But anyway, so so anyway, but then she discovers that her roommate has died, and she's shocked, and so she goes the only place she thinks, I just met the squire to the crown prince, I'm gonna go there for help. So she shows up and asks them for help, and he's like, and so he gets drawn into this and has to help her solve this murder. So they're trying to figure out what's going on and what happened to this girl. And so yeah, it's a murder mystery. So they're thrown together, opposites thrown together to figure this out.
Very cool.
And it was really kind of fun.
Yes, I love it. So being in the fantasy world, is there like magic in it? What makes it like the fantasy elements? So you said like different languages you were doing. Is there like different magic type of things?
There is. So, in my story world, there are 2 types of magic. There is the magic that the character God, who I call Armand, gave the first kings who came to the land. And it's kind of like a telepathic magic. So they can speak to other people who have this magic and this kind of thing. And there's other things they can do with it, but that is the magic that was bestowed on them. And some people have it if they have it in the blood of kings, which is where that series title comes from. Their magic that comes in the blood of these people who are descended from the kings.
Oh,
Um,
cool.
and then there's also dark magic where people are trying to do magic who don't, apart from God. So on their own, like
Mm.
figuring out ways to do it. And that could anything you can think of really. And so there's those 2 opposing types of magic. And I like the idea of magic is a great way in a Christian fantasy to use allegories and things. So I have very much a light versus darkness kind of a theme. And in my original trilogy, I literally had that. In the original trilogy, the land itself was half shrouded in this curse of darkness. So if you went across the border, it would be dark all the time and things were dying. And it was because evil was growing in the hearts of men, and it started to grow bigger. And that's kind of the theme of that first trilogy was, how can this group of people, you know, try to push back darkness? What do they have to do? Like the people had been turning their backs on God for so long, and so that was
Mm.
that theme. So now we're in this new era. Light is back. They succeeded. Spoilers on my original trilogy, but so we don't have the literal darkness anymore, but people remember it, and some people really still want it, which is sad, but I felt very true to human nature that some people were like, well, we want to go back to what we knew, even though it was bad for you, right? And so we're living in a world, that's the world that my character's living in now.
Mm.
And so yeah, he's discovering that even though that trilogy tied up with a bow, there's still a lot of darkness in the world still, even.
Yeah, darkness, unresolved. That sounds
Mhm.
really awesome. I love it how there can be a lot of allegory if you think about it with that. Like that's absolutely true because the light and the dark, and then people wanting to go their own way as well. I mean, that's so like just so indicative of just sin. That's just
Yeah.
what it is, just going against God and going against the light. And Oh, it's so cool. I love how you called it the blood of kings, and that's like the king line, very similar to Jesus, like Jesus, the blood of Jesus, right? The bloodline of Jesus, which is pretty cool. Who is the King of Kings?
Yeah, absolutely.
Wonderful. Oh, that sounds so fun. I can't wait. So, we are almost at time, but before we go, I just wanted to ask you, was there anything so in this journey, which I love so much? Thank you for sharing too, that how you were like doing mission trips and stuff before you were even a Christian, like how you just kind of stumbled onto it, but in reality, it was God kind of pulling you in. And then you meet your husband. I love that story. That's a romance you got to write too. Okay. We're planting the seed. Talk to Susie. She'll write it. I love that. I love it so much. But in this journey of yours, you are just encountering so many things. You guys are going through this together, ups and downs, different, having a family, doing all that. Was there a verse that kind of guided you through these different stages in your lives? Like, especially doing the youth pastor and writing, teaching, doing all of that. It's a lot of different things. Was there a verse that really encouraged you through that, or even encouraged your characters in your new book?
Um, let's see. There's so many good verses. And I found that over my life, I've held on to different verses at different seasons. And it's actually
Yeah.
really interesting. I can read my old books and remember what I was going through when I wrote them, um,
Oh,
which is really interesting. And sometimes, like, there's a couple that it was not a good season, and I read it, and the emotions come back. But anyway,
oh,
so one of those really sticks out to me, and it's Exodus 14:14. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. And like I've said, I'm a doer. I I I have a how do I say this? I think a lot of Americans have this problem. We like to be in control of our own life,
for
and
sure. Just
that's
humans. It's human,
it
girlfriend,
is
for
it
sure.
is.
But yes.
But God, is teaching us you're not in control of anything. You think you're in control, but God is in control. And if we continually I actually started praying with my hands open because I will take things
Oh,
back, right? I'll say, I give it to you, Lord, and oh, I got, okay, I took it back. So like I will remember they're empty because I gave them to you, and I'm not going to take them back. And so that verse really helped me in a time where we were going through some serious hardship, and there was nothing we could do.
mm,
And sometimes it's when you're at those lowest places where you're forced to rely on God that you actually learn that you weren't relying on God as much as you thought you were all this time,
mm.
even as youth pastors, we thought, oh yeah, we know what we're doing. And it's not that we didn't, but I think especially these independent, kind of people that we are, we're fine. We got this. But God asks us to trust him. And that means open hands. And that means trust. That means not taking over and thinking we have all the answers and we're going to do it our way. And so be still.
I love it. Thank you so much for sharing that, Jill. And I think that that's just beautiful. What a wonderful way to come to him in prayer with your hands open like that. I've seen people pray like that and even just worship like that. But even like in your personal prayers, opening your hands is it's such a wonderful way to show like I'm just giving it up to you. And then taking back what he is giving you for that day. Because I've talked with some women. Actually, I had another podcast called the Eyewitness Podcast, and some of the women that have gone through a lot of different traumas in their lives. And one of them I remember told me that it was a very like abrupt, her husband had died very, very abrupt. It was very sudden. They had 7 children. It was very difficult. And she would go into her van and do the same thing and just look for the verse and the strength for that one day, because that's all she could take. That's all she could like hold in her heart was enough for that day. She couldn't even think about any future or anything because it was just so hard. And I love that picture of you just coming to him and opening your hands. And I think that that's just beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah,
It's
you
such a
bet.
wonderful encouragement. It really is. Oh, I love it. Now I'm going to come to him with my hands open too, because that's trust. I mean, it's
Yeah.
hard to trust. It's hard to trust, especially I'm a doer too. It's
Mhm.
very hard for people who, especially for all of us, but I feel like, yeah, like you said, especially doers who you're like, I want to do this. I want to do this. I want to do this. It's very hard to just go up, up. I got to remember my place,
Right.
because he'll show us our place for sure.
Yes.
Usually it, might take a little bit of fire or some kind of something to make us bend. So, but yeah, I love that. Thank you. Before we go, so your book Squire of Truth is out, and how can our listeners get a copy, and where is the best place that they can connect with you?
Readers can get copies of Squire of Truth from the Sunrise Publishing bookstore, from anywhere books are sold, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Kobo, all the places. I have a website, jillwilliamson.com. I have a store in my website too. If you want signed copies, you can get them there. I don't sell the ebooks and audiobooks on my site, only the print. But it is available on ebook and audiobook, and the audiobook is fantastic. We got to do auditions, and there's 2 British narrators, and they're just fabulous. I love them.
Oh,
They did a
wonderful.
great job. I was tickled. I got them to sing for me because I've got musicians. I wrote. I'm going to go on a tangent again, but I wrote little melodies for all the little bits of songs, and then I sang it to them, and then they sang it. And I was so happy.
Did you?
I'm so
Oh, I love
nerdy.
it.
I'm just
No, that's beautiful. Can you sing, Jill? Can you sing?
well, I can sing. I used to be on worship team, but I'm not like getting an album or anything. So I can sing on key.
Oh, I love it. That is so fun. One of my author friends, I remember we did one of the many courses, right? So, as a writer, you're like doing all these craft courses and stuff. And she sings. That's what she like started. And then she wrote this wonderful children's series, and she would do a song like for each book. It's just so
Oh, that's so
fun. I
fun.
love that.
Yeah,
I love that you like sang, or you had them sing. They're like auditioning, like for real.
they were
I love
amazing.
it.
Susie did the same. I said, Susie, should we try to write like a real song? And she's like, well, I'm not sure if there's a market for medieval music right now, Jill. Okay. But maybe there is, and she doesn't know it yet. Maybe we could start a new trend.
Maybe. New trend. Absolutely. Get some bonus content going in there, girlfriend. You got it. Singing in British, with a British accent. I love it. Oh, that is fun. Well, I will definitely put your book and your website in the show notes. So for listeners, and I really encourage listeners to go to the author's website, especially like you said, you can do signed copies there. It's just a wonderful way to connect with authors. Everybody, it's just lovely to get that direct connection, especially because, if you get on Jill's email list and you're sending her, messages, it's just wonderful because connection is just so precious. And it's why we do this, right? It's why authors want to, we want to hear from readers. We want to hear from you. We want to bless you. And I think it's wonderful. So go to Jill's website, get her book, get a signed copy. You'll have it. I'm sure it's beautiful. The cover is absolutely gorgeous. I cannot wait to read it. It's just wonderful. Thank you so much, Joe. And just thank you for doing what you do. You and your husband just sharing these wonderful creative projects that God is leading you into. I, just be praying for you through all of that. And I'm just so excited to see what you'll do next. And just thank you for being here and sharing your heart with us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Kelly. It was amazing.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it with one book lover like yourself. We love to bless as many people as we can with exclusive interviews and, of course, great books. Each month, we host a themed book giveaway where you can win a selection of Christian romance novels and some extra goodies, too. This month's theme is Be My Valentine. We're giving away 5 heartwarming Christian romance books filled with love, second chances, and faith, all perfect for Valentine's Day. If you love sweet, uplifting stories, this is for you. Whether you're listening right as this episode comes out or in the future and don't want to miss out on the giveaway, no worries. You'll find the link to the current giveaway on our website, ChristianRomancePodcast.com. Thanks so much for listening, and until next time, keep your faith, share the love, and happy reading.